This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India Innovation Index 2020. The participants are Shekhar Iyer, political analyst, and Neelab Srivastav, journalist.
The Niti Aayog on Wednesday released the second Innovation Index of states. This was released by the Aayog's Vice Chairman Mr. Rajiv Kumar and CEO Mr. Amitabh Kant. And this has been developed on the lines of the Global Innovation Index. The last or the first edition of this Innovation Index was released in October 2019. And this was a maiden exercise to bring together the metrics of assessing the innovation capabilities of various states in the country and also the union territories. According to the data that has been released today on Wednesday, Karnataka has topped the chart straight second time in a row. And this is followed by states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Kerala and so on. The index basically aims to analyze and assimilate a number of development-related indices under the larger umbrella of innovation. Will that be correct to say, Mr. Iyer?
Indeed, because innovation, need to encourage innovation, and what exactly we mean by innovation. All these things are now gaining importance because India's wish of becoming a $5 trillion economy is intricately linked with this innovation-oriented approach to economic growth. See, in this pandemic crisis, what has come very clear is most countries are looking inward. India should also use this opportunity to build its own innovative capabilities to meet future global demand so that we are able to produce a range of novel products, create novel services and processes. And what happens normally when there is an economic crisis, people don't look for innovation. They rather try to conserve whatever is there. Because a good example is one of the depressing years in America when actually the number of patents that were being filed, whether individual or firm-based patents, they came down. But in the present scenario, what has happened is, after the government has come up with this Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India campaign, you are seeing there is a strong push to empower local manufacturing sector so that we can produce innovative products at an economical rate and then go for competition. So in this context, the idea of going for an India Innovation Index has gained very much importance. And the other important aspect is India has just broken into the top 50 nations of Global Innovation Index. In fact, the World Intellectual Property Organization, they have declared India as one of the leading innovators in the Central and Southern Asia region. So therefore, I think this second edition of this index is going to give us a detailed insight into what all goes into making the best innovation ecosystem, both at the national level and also at the state level.
Mr. Iyer, you said this is more often looks like to be more of a healthy competition because when we have different kind of states competing for excellence, there is where you get solutions to day-to-day problems of the life, overall the regime of doing business. And I would like to ask you a question. Is this also to do with the overall government philosophy or the agenda of ensuring ease of doing business? I was listening to Mr. Rajiv Kumar. He was speaking and he said that this is also aimed at cutting the red tape in different processes that the government has and also step to ensure or to probably pave a way to bring back talent to India which can manufacture, innovate and contribute to the national mainstream.
Indeed, see, the present edition, the second edition of India Innovation Index has been compiled keeping some realities in mind. And the idea is when you identify the difficulties, when you identify the hurdles, which is preventing good ecosystem that encourages innovation, the state governments can actually get down into removing these hurdles so that the policymakers and other stakeholders can get a comprehensive assessment. Because what they have done is they have divided innovation system into two groups. One is the enablers, other is the performers. And by bringing these two ways of looking at the innovation system and grading the states accordingly, what they are doing is, like for instance, enablers. What enables the creation of an innovation system? Where they have identified human capital in terms of identifying number of people who are working on PhDs, people who are filing for patents, people who are filing for processes, and then on the basis of these patents, what kind of investment are being attracted. Then, in order to enable a conducive environment, what is the safety environment, what is the legal environment, and followed by what is the business environment that is created. So these are the five things way of looking at what is enabling innovation, or the enablers. Now the other side is what is called the performers. On the basis of enablers, you can see how the knowledge output is taking place. First at the grassroots level, innovation, then as I mentioned, patent application and innovation application, trademark application. Then from that comes what is called the startups. Government of India has gone in a very big way to promote startups in terms of giving them tax concessions, in making capital available. So how are the startups growing in these various states on the basis of the environment? Then most important thing is how is the knowledge of innovative products, innovative practices and innovative processes, how are they being diffused? What kind of indications are coming by way of what exports are taking place? What are the geographical indications? What are the industry-based indications? So on these parameters, both enablers and performers, the states have been ranked this time. So therefore, what we are seeing is each state government is free to create the kind of environment to attract these innovators. The Prime Minister has always been saying that our federalism must also mean there is a competition among states to attract talents, to attract startups. And for the other service sector, which will come obviously when the startups start coming up with very economic models.
The enablers and performers. Two very important words you said, Mr. Iyer. Also, such an exercise, a stock-taking exercise, or we may call it a SWOT kind of an exercise, where you analyze your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The exercise also aims to identify the gaps and the human resources that are available with us and probably what can be hired from the open market or from dipping into the talent pool. No talk today, Iyer Saab, has a background of the COVID-19 pandemic that is still raging. We have seen that the vaccines are now out, but still the pandemic is still here. And we are talking of a new normal across the globe. So these kind of innovations, are we also linking it to the self-reliant or the Atmanirbhar Bharat kind of a concept where we are also looking at reducing our dependence on imports?
Absolutely. In fact, I will draw your attention. The fact that, the way we tackled the COVID itself. For instance, when the COVID outbreak was noticed, our first challenge was finding the necessary personal protection equipment, which initially we had to import because we didn't have local manufacturers. But within a couple of months, we saw that number of local entrepreneurs got into making this personal protection equipment, what is called the PPE, for our health workers to handle the COVID cases. That is a good example of urgently created innovation. And within 6 months, we were actually exporting PPE to different countries. That is one. Second example of innovation I can see is COVID vaccine. One vaccine is what is your Covishield, which has been developed by the Serum Institute in collaboration with Oxford. Now the other one which has come, Covaxin, which is actually an innovative program of biotech company and the Indian Council of Medical Research. Now, this itself shows, when it comes to tackling pandemic, you need this kind of innovative sticks. And that itself shows, not just in the case of emergencies like the pandemic, even in other areas, more and more innovation means less dependence on outside, dependent on factors which are not in your control. Because at least within the country, you have sufficient human talent pool. You have the available financial assistance. And you have governments, state governments where, actually do their part to encourage such startups and such innovative processes. So this is very important. And the other thing we must remember is, why is this innovation index looking at it in terms of states? Because the whole innovation landscape as we see it today has to take into account the differences or disparities in states. Some states have very good infrastructure facilities, but other states are far lagging behind. So the idea is we have to maximize their innovative capacities and we'll have to provide solutions. That can come only when you have some kind of a parameter, some kind of standardization to look at the problems. So that across states you can see which are the states which are having problems and what can be a solution. Now an index like this produced by Niti Aayog helps the state governments because these state governments can look at states which are doing well and also pick up the best practices from there and implement their own states. Their own local innovators can be encouraged to utilize whatever is available and do the best.
While one understands that the unique geographical location or a demographic dividend for a particular state may act very favorable or pose a challenge to a particular state, Mr. Iyer, vis-a-vis innovation capabilities, but what could be the indices that could be uniform for all the states? For example, easing restrictions, cutting taxes or bottlenecks, ensuring better roads and rail connectivity and infrastructure development. Where is there also a scope within this innovation indices or the index where you can collaborate multiple states who share borders or who do not? Can there be a scope for that also?
Well, I think the states are realizing and are going to realize more that innovation is not a process limited to particular firms or particular industry. Rather, it is a multi-sectoral process involving various actors, various institutions and organizations. If we have created an economy that is steered by innovation across all sectors, it means that you have to create a conducive innovation ecosystem. And that will mean what? You will have to be very inclusive and sensitive to the aspiration and needs of this country. Demand is always created when you are able to identify what is it that people are aspiring for. What kind of processes can bring about the ease of business or ease of life, which you mentioned at the beginning.
Also talking about post-pandemic scenario when we had lockdown and then the economy went into revival mode, and then we had simultaneous unlocks and also different steps taken by the governments even in the private sector to get back into the original mode, spin the wheels of the economy as fast as it could. But when it comes to job creation and also one specific subject of a special incentive given to certain states, maybe northeastern states, there has been a special thrust on the northeast region of the country by various ministries of the government, and also incentivizing maybe hill states because they have a very peculiar kind of a location. So are these indices also taken into consideration when we talk about the innovation index?
I think so, because they have actually divided in this grouping that they have made. This particular index, what they have done is they have divided the states and territories into 17 major states, states which have fairly a rather rich resource base in terms of infrastructure, in terms of finances, and 10 northeast and hill states. They have put all the hill states which have problems in terms of logistics, in terms of accessibility. They have put them in separate category, and then they have put 9 city states like Delhi or Chandigarh and the union territories which are coming in this. Now, these 3 categories can be seen in terms of the outcome and governance, because the Prime Minister keeps on saying that let us not be process-oriented, let us be outcome-oriented. Let us work for a system that looks at what is the final outcome. Now, when you look at the final outcome, obviously, employment generation will be a very important indicator of what kind of innovative practices are being encouraged by the respective state government. Now, hill states, whatever is the digital era, these hill states can actually go for a lot of schemes which, taking the help of centers approach, that these backward regions must get a lot of financial assistance and encourage local talent to go for more startups and processes which the hill states can easily create at a short span of time.
My last question to you, Mr. Iyer. Again, I will talk about COVID-19, and in that context, this innovation index. It is going to be a new normal. We need to look at out-of-box solutions, rely very heavily on technology because the WFH, or so to say, work from home, and WFA, work from anywhere, that regime has kicked in. More and more institutions are looking forward to adopting these. And for a country like India, which is aiming to be a 5 trillion economy, how do you see this innovation index helps out and also pans out the kind of invitation to the investors from across the globe and also within the country to boost manufacturing and domestic manufacturing capabilities by way of Make in India, Made in India?
So, well, the reality today, Nilab, is that India and the world have undergone a tectonic shift due to this COVID-19 pandemic. Now, many of countries have seen shutdown, economic shutdown, and they are recovering from that. Now, because of this scenario, the role of innovation as an important tool or an agent to revitalize the economy has never been more important. Therefore, this 2020 edition of this Innovation Index is definitely going to be a new way of looking at things, new way of giving that booster dosage that is required for the economy. Therefore, I feel that with this kind of new ways of looking at and measuring up the economy in terms of innovation and encouraging more startups, more process and more entrepreneurs to look at innovation as a way of economic growth, I think it's a very important indicator for in the times to come, and there is never going to be a go back to old ways of doing things.
Right, never going back to the things, and obviously the first ratings when the world has not seen the COVID-19 pandemic, the second ratings have come at a time when we are already battling and now emerging out from the shadow of what we have gone through in the year 2020. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, Mr. Iyer.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on India Innovation Index 2020. The participants were Shekhar Iyer, political analyst, and Neelab Srivastav, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on a mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.
This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India-US strategic partnership. The participants are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, when we see the India-US relationship, and we have seen that in the last few years, this relationship has really grown, whether we talk of defense cooperation or we talk of cooperation in other regional matters. How do you feel that this changes or it doesn't change as the US sees a change of guard as we see President Trump leaving and a new President, Joseph Biden, take over?
Simran, you are very right when you say that the bilateral partnership between India and the United States has been on an upward trajectory. Actually, since March 2000, when President Bill Clinton visited India. So from that time onwards, irrespective of the fact as to which party has occupied the White House, Bill Clinton was a Democrat. He relinquished office at the beginning of 2001. For 8 years, we had George Bush, who was a Republican. Then we had 8 years of Barack Obama, again a Democrat, and then 4 years of Donald Trump. So in the tenure of all these presidents, our relationship has grown. So I would say that our bilateral partnership between India and the United States is sanitized and removed from any change in the White House. So I'm very sanguine and confident that under Biden charge also the bilateral partnership will increase. And of course, Biden has dealt with India. Biden knows India. He has 8 years of experience as the vice president when again our relations improved very significantly. In 2006, he had made the comment that he expected the relationship between India and the United States to be the strongest in 2020, and it is a coincidence that in 2021 January he has taken over the President of the United States. So I think all things considered, there is not only a convergence of values. Both the countries are democracies. They are open. There is freedom of expression, freedom of religion, transparency. So the value systems are the same. And now increasingly, the interests between the two countries, they are also the same. So taking all this into account, I think the relations are bound to move in the upward trajectory as they have done for the last 20 years.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, as you pointed about Joseph Biden and how he has always been positive when it comes to India, do you feel that the fact that his vice president, Kamala Harris, is also of South Asian descent, her mother went from India to California to study, and the linkages that she has maintained with her heritage, do you feel that this will potentially play a positive role in adding positivity to the India-US ties?
Well, it could give an impetus to the already expanding India-US relations, but I would not frankly like to put either much hope or many expectations from the fact that Kamala Devi Harris has taken over as the vice president. Because you would recall that during the campaigning, she focused much more on her African-American descent, and she spoke about her South Asian or Indian origins only when she was addressing a gathering or group of Indian people. Maybe that is correct for her politically, but still I think we should treat her as the leader, as number two, the vice president of the most powerful country and a very most significant partner as far as India is concerned. Her primary interest would be to advance and promote American interests. And as I said, the interest by and large of the United States and India, they converge. There is a huge overlap. So I think with her also, we will be able to work very productively. Prime Minister Modi had sent her a message of congratulations, you would recall, even on 8th November, just after the results were unofficially, informally declared. And last evening also, after both President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris took their oath of allegiance, after that he sent separate messages of congratulations to both of them and said that a stronger relationship and partnership between India and the United States is not only good for these two countries, but good for the world. And that India looks forward to collaborating with both of them to take our relationship to newer heights.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, we have seen that the China factor has played quite a bit of a role when it comes to the India-US ties, especially when we look at the year gone by and the coronavirus. And we also saw that President Trump was quite blunt about his criticism of China, about the role he felt that China had played globally, and Trump also pushed back at China at various levels. We've also seen that the India-China relationship has had its own share of strain. Do you feel, one, that the U.S. attitude or U.S. policy towards China under Biden is likely to stay the same as Trump's, or we would see a difference? And does that then difference also play a factor in the India-U.S. relations overall?
Simran, when you say that China is an important element, I will not say that it is the only element in terms of getting India and the United States, because there are large number of other interests which both India and the United States share. But China is an important element in bringing the two countries together, both because of the fact that the coronavirus came from China, from Wuhan, and also because China has started flexing its muscles. It has become extremely aggressive. And as far as India is concerned, we have seen it in Ladakh now. So China has become very aggressive as far as we are concerned, but also in terms of human rights violations in East Turkestan, which it calls Xinjiang. Also Hong Kong, its flexing of muscles in the South China Sea, even against Japan in the Senkaku Islands, against Taiwan. So the United States has pushed back against China. And I think the policy of Joe Biden is also going to be tough. It might not be confrontational. There might be a difference of nuances. The other aspect would be that the United States under Biden, I don't think is going to act alone. It will act in alliance with its partners, whether they are European allies or as far as its allies in East Asia are concerned. So this has been one of the themes of President Joe Biden, that he is going to enhance and strengthen the alliances which had grown very weak because of the disdain with which President Donald Trump held them. As far as NATO is concerned, as far as the transatlantic alliance is concerned, as far as partnership with Japan, Australia, South Korea. So President Joe Biden is going to focus on those aspects also. And he started his first set of calls after he was announced as the winner on the 7th of November were to the partners in Europe, and next were to partners in East Asia, and then he also spoke to Prime Minister Modi. So the partnership with India also stands quite high in the pecking order as far as the new Biden administration is concerned.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, do you feel that international organizations also offer India and the US another opportunity where they can cooperate, they can work together on various policy issues as India sits on the UNSC? And also because Joe Biden, unlike Donald Trump, will be looking at international organizations for solutions and will not be turning away from them, as we've seen happening in the case of US in the last 4 years.
No, you're absolutely right, because the challenges that the world today faces can be resolved only through multilateral action. We have seen the coronavirus pandemic that I think all the countries really needed to come together to deal with it, first in terms of testing, in terms of tracing, trying to find a vaccine. But what we have seen is that all the countries have been working separately, working individually, working on their own. So I think this multilateralism has to be brought in. And the fact that India for the next 2 years is going to be on the UN Security Council as a non-permanent member, that is going to be very important. The other aspect, whether it is the climate change, again, Donald Trump, he had moved out of the Paris Accord, and one of the executive orders signed immediately after assuming charge yesterday by President Joe Biden was to accede both to the Paris Accord as also to the WHO. So I think multilateralism is going to be extremely important in all these cases, even as far as trade issues are concerned, because Donald Trump did not approve any of the members of the appellate body of the World Trade Organization in December 2019. So since that time, it has really been a moribund organization, because none one of the trade complaints can really be taken to the ultimate resolution. So I think multilateralism is definitely going to be an area where both countries and other partners like United Kingdom, like France, they can cooperate. And India is also going to be chairing the G20 in 2023. So I think there is a possibility for the Biden team and India to work together and to be on the same wavelength and same platform.
Mr. Sajjanhar, we've also seen that as the Trump administration comes to an end, one of the things that people of his administration have pointed out is that the Trump administration did not start fresh wars in any part of the world. And they've also gone on to point that it was Donald Trump who actually withdrew U.S. troops from around the world, and they've said that this is a big positive. When we see the region near us, especially Afghanistan, where we have seen this withdrawal of the troops, we've also seen in parallel the peace talks which are going on. Do you feel that the policies of Joseph Biden might start changing in Afghanistan? We might see a slowdown of this withdrawal, because this is something which affects India's security, it affects India's regional infrastructure, and in effect, it also comes between India and the United States relations, because Afghanistan becomes a common point where the US has concerns and India has concerns.
No, you're absolutely right. But I think we need to be very clear. Number one, that Joe Biden also, his policy has been of withdrawal from Afghanistan. So I don't think there is going to be much of a change as far as the withdrawal of the US and NATO forces from Afghanistan is concerned. I think the difference can be that the very rapid pace at which the withdrawal was to take place. You would recall that President Donald Trump had said that by 15th January, there would be just about 2,500 US troops that would be stationed in Afghanistan, and all of them will be moved out by April of this year. Now, that timetable could undergo a change, and Joe Biden and his Defense Secretary, General Lloyd Austin, they might not be in such a tearing hurry. I think they would like to see that, some contingent of the U.S. Special Forces for training and undertaking some such special operations will be left in Afghanistan. And of course, the withdrawal of the other troops, it also might be extended and might be prolonged beyond the April deadline that President Trump had agreed to, had signed on when this Doha Accord was signed on February 29th last year.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, as the India-US ties move forward and we have a change of guard in DC, what is the focus areas that you think both India and the US could focus on, that one sees changes domestically, one sees a few of changes which are happening globally, but despite that fact, if these are the focus areas both nations focus on, we will find that the India-US ties will continue to move forward in a positive fashion.
When President-elect Joe Biden at that time had called Prime Minister Modi on the 17th of November, and then the tweet that Prime Minister Modi had put out, he had mentioned three items, and I could mention those to you. One is he'd mentioned COVID-19, where both the countries are going to cooperate, and that I think is a very important issue, because as we see, yesterday there were more than 400,000 people affected with coronavirus in the United States. So that is the priority number one for the Biden administration. And of course, we are in a reasonably decent place at this moment. So I think we will also like to work with them. We have 2 vaccines in the market and more are coming. So that is one area. The second was climate change. And the third was Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific really means a pushback against China, trying to constrain China. In addition to that, I think India would also be interested, if possible, to strike a mini trade deal with the United States. The United States is our major trading partner. And since we have moved out of RCEP, I think we should try to strengthen our access to the U.S. market going forward.
And in the coming days, we will continue our discussions on the India-US ties, especially with an eye on the transition which has happened in DC. With this, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India-US Strategic Partnership. The participants were Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our website newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.
This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on prospects of 11.5% growth rate for India. The participants are Shubhmoy Bhattacharjee, economic analyst, and Arjun Chaudhary, EIR correspondent.
Today we will have our discussion on the revision of the 2021 forecast as far as India's economy is concerned by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. They revised the forecast from 6.8% for the 2021 to 11.5% growth. We'll try and understand as to why and how IMF has revised this forecast by almost 5%. So Shubhamai, do tell us for the benefit of our listeners as to how is it that IMF has revised these figures at this stage?
Well, Arjun, what's happening is essentially the effect of the pandemic is lessening in some countries. The scope of revival of economic activity is becoming clear. So essentially what's happening is that the data that's getting available with all the agencies is coming up for further and further revision. One might be surprised, after all data is continuous, and then why is it that from one analysis to the next, and in the span of a few months, why are these data getting changed so rapidly? Well, the reason for that is that this is an unusual year. There have been periods when there's been absolutely no data flow, and now there have been indicators coming in from different parts of the economy, in India, abroad, and those data are helping revise the International Monetary Fund estimates. And they are startling revisions, but that's exactly what one could be surprised. But one is not totally flabbergasted because the global shutdown and the revival from that have been so dramatic that these sort of corrections, and in India's case, a very welcome correction, is now getting penned in.
So specifically, the growth forecast that has been revised is for the financial year 2021 to 2022, and that is expected to be 11.5% as 6.8% that was estimated or predicted earlier. This was announced by IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, and her statement is to the effect that decisive action and decisive steps were taken to combat with the COVID-19 pandemic in India, bearing in mind the demographics and how the population is clustered, how difficult it can be for any administration to contain the spread of this virus. So they have actually, in this economic forecast, given credit to the government of India as to how they've handled and managed the pandemic and the after effects of it, which has economic consequences.
One major thing that India has been able to achieve is that we have seen that when COVID has been controlled, and after that, when mobility has got again resumed, COVID has come back to hurt several economies. It is to the credit, and the India government and the state governments must be able to take credit that due to a combination of a lot of circumstances, contact tracing, planning, and so on and so forth, the rise of mobility that we are seeing across the economy has not been accompanied by a consequent rise in level of infection. Of course, the nature of the beast is such that you can never say that this is permanent or something. But definitely, there is surely a heartening reason to feel from the numbers that are coming for the last few months that the infection rate in across almost every major state in India has tapered off. And as people have come out to resume their economic activities, and this is especially important because in India, we are largely a service sector economy. About 54%, 55% of our economy's GDP is largely services sector. Now, services, in most cases, excepting in sectors like IT and others, requires people to be in close proximity. Yet, despite that proximity rising up, the level of infection has not come back to haunt. And obviously, the government would have the reason to feel that it has been able to flatten the curve, and which is why the IMF feels that the level of rebound in the economy will be almost at full scale, which is why the revision from this year's contraction of -8% to next year's 11.5% positive, it will be a journey of that scale.
So we have to factor in the low base effect as well, where the contraction is of -8% for this financial year and before the next financial year actually starts, where the IMF forecast is for 11.5%. Apart from this, the IMF has also spoken about policy support. So despite the lockdowns and the restrictions which have been imposed or even lifted, the policy has continued, and the government has not only provided stimulus to key sectors of the economy, but also ensured that policy reforms have not stalled. They have continued towards infrastructure development, healthcare, dispensation of a vaccine. How do you see India actually competing with China, which is the only nation which has a positive GDP of about 2.6%? Are we in a position right now to compete with China, bearing in mind how the IMF has forecast?
That's a major point, that to what extent India is able to sort of, revive its growth potential. As you would know, that from the period 2014 onwards, 14, 15, 16, India had the honor of being the fastest growing economy, and that had slowed down, and this revival is therefore all the more creditable. Essentially, it shows two things. One, that the reforms, as you rightly pointed out, will come in very handy, but I would also say that the reforms that have been started earlier obviously have started sort of getting factored into the economy. And these are the reforms, especially in the field of capital allocation, on insolvency and bankruptcy, the reforms in digitalization of the economy. These reforms are essentially those which have started earlier, and they have now added pace at which the economy opens up. And of course, the reforms that have now been announced in June onwards will also have a sort of, add to them, making it a virtuous cycle which India had been lacking for quite some time. So the key point is that the reforms give a wonderful strength to the economy to expand, to take advantage of all the possibilities that are coming up, and to therefore keep on growing at a healthy pace for quite some years, which is necessary for the economy to really become a competitor in Asia and then globally.
So the business cycle for services has not stalled. If you look at the GST collection, which has been more than 1 lakh crore rupees for successive months. But how do you see manufacturing pick up? The index of industrial production, factory output indicators are not very positive at this stage. The budget is going to be announced on the 1st of February, where key announcements will be made as to how the government will carry out its expenditure. So once you look at revenue in terms of GST collection, what is the policy going to be for the government if allocation of revenue towards expenditures and also to earn revenue for the next financial year?
In terms of allocation of expenditure, obviously what the economy is looking out for is a huge bump up in capital expenditure. That is very necessary at this stage. Sectors like roads, ports, railways, health, education, all of these sectors, even public investment in agriculture, these are all sectors that can soak in a massive amount of capital, and they are the ones which we would be hoping to get substantial additional allocation, and not only just allocation, but also the speed at which those money are used in those sectors, the government coming up with ideas and thoughts on it, on how to do them. The raising of the money is the big challenge out here, because what has happened is that because of not just COVID, but even otherwise, tax to GDP ratio, which measures how much of the economy's spending is being financed by taxes, that had started declining. And that's not a healthy thing. Now, we would be expecting, as you said, the GST revenues have increased. We should also be hoping that the rate of addition of corporate tax, the government, as you know, had reduced the rates of corporate tax substantially, and of income tax, should grow well. Because without tax revenues, it is impossible for the government to keep on spending at the clip at which it is necessary to do to be able to refinance the economy and in the way it is needed. The other source, of course, is asset sales. And by asset sales, I just don't mean disinvestment in companies, but also monetization of the assets that the government holds. Government holds huge parcels of land, which are often left without any use. The government holds lots of other resources which are underutilized. These resources, all of these, which is basically comes under the rubric of what is called asset monetization, is very necessary. So, at one level, we need higher taxes to GDP ratio, but obviously they cannot come by raising of the taxes. That has to come simply by people paying more taxes at the current rate, and that, along with asset monetization, would be very important to finance the expenditure at the scale that is necessary to create the virtuous cycle, or rather to sustain the virtuous cycle to which the IMF is talking about.
It's a very interesting point you raise, Shubhamoy, with everyone obviously looking at disinvestment policy, whether there would be a public asset sale or not. But here you are referring to rentals, how land and building space can be let out on rent that can also stabilize rentals across the country, especially commercial rentals as a source of income for the government. How do you see wages improve for the average person in the employment sector, and how do you see this in correlation to company profitability?
At this stage, companies which are overly obsessed with profit would, I suspect, be doing themselves a disservice, because this is a space which comes very rarely in any country's history, where there's an enormous scope for capacity expansion. And companies which are keen to plow the money, reinvested earnings back into investment would be well recognized by the share markets. And by doing that, automatically, the companies create more room for employment. Obviously, what happens is in the high-end manufacturing, you don't get much of employment. But what happens is when big companies start spending on stuff, then they create a circular economy of demand for other, right down to the very small units, where the employment strength actually resides. So essentially, now the trick is to ensure that companies start investing.
Well, Shubhamoy, another factor linking both employment and tax collection is FDI investment into the economy. The December figures for FDI have actually fallen by almost 50%. But if you compare it to the global FDI inflow, India has done certainly very well. How do you see the FDI collections picking up and that investment being converted into factory output, into employment, into tax collections, and more importantly, the shifting of manufacturing from China to countries like India?
FDI flows do not follow a monthly pattern. So their flows, unlike the tax flows, which have a monthly steadiness to them, FDI flows can be quite erratic. So I wouldn't read much into the December dip, because these can change just with one deal and so on. But what has happened is there's a lot of companies which are finding reasons to expand their production capacity in India. In terms of global possibilities, they are still very limited, which means that the possibilities are intense.
So basically, brownfield projects are more likely to succeed than greenfield projects, and we've already effectively spoken about financing of infrastructure projects that will come out from the coffers of government, but private sector lending toward these kind of projects and brownfield projects. Do you think maybe that will be announced in the union budget?
Right from 2018, we have actually made it very clear that we are much more keen towards brownfield investment. Greenfield investment, for many reasons in India, takes time to take off because of, initial delays, land clearances, and so on and so forth. So yes, one can't be surprised that the private sector typically and FDI typically wants to move on into brownfield investment. But of course, it raises the question as to what happens to fresh manufacturing capacity expansion. Well, that is where the budget will have, I'm sure, some things to say, because there are lots of sectors where the government, as the primary builder, can create projects which may be difficult for the private sector to start off and do. So once the government creates and brings the project to completion, then the private sector can take over from there for the running of the project, which is the brownfield project, and execute and run them properly. There are plenty of examples of those. The airport privatization is one of good example of those. We can have lots more. The ports themselves, for instance, are waiting for, and there's a great opportunity there for monetization of the port properties. There are so many others. This is something where a large amount of FDI basically gets attracted.
So fiscal prudence is just as important as the union budget will look to ensure that expenditures don't exceed revenues and they're within the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Thank you so much, Shubhamoy, for being with us on this program.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on prospects of 11.5% growth rate for India. The participants were Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Economic Analyst, and Arjun Chaudhary, AIR Correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.
This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you an interview with Chief Economic Advisor Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian on Economic Survey 2020-21. The interviewer is journalist Ruchika Chitravanshi.
The Economic Survey 2020-21 was released today, predicting a V-shaped recovery for the next fiscal years and also projecting the economy to grow by 11% in the coming fiscal on the back of massive vaccination exercise and a rebound in consumer demand. Now, like all other surveys, this survey has presented us the state of the economy, the challenges, and the way forward. The survey has talked about India's pandemic response, which has been focused on saving lives and livelihood, and also it has talked about the benefits of the lockdown in containing the spread of the pandemic in the country, which helped us get back to reviving the economy, and also talks about the four-pillar strategy of containment, fiscal, financial, and long-term structural reforms that the government took to get control over the situation. And the survey has noted that a favorable monetary policy ensured abundant liquidity, and it gave immediate relief to debtors through temporary moratorium, and it unclogged policy transmission. All this and more, let's dive into the Economic Survey 2021 with Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian. Dr. Subramanian, as the survey says, that this was once-in-a-century crisis that the economy faced in the last year. In this context, what has been the broad theme of this year's economic survey?
The response that the government came up with was a very mature, measured one, based on some key principles that India has adhered to since the ages. One of those, in the Mahabharata mentioned that apadi pranaraksha hi dharmasya pratham ankuraha. What that means is, apada means difficulty. So when a life is in danger, saving those lives is the origin of dharma, something that we all take very seriously, dharma. So faced with this unprecedented pandemic, our dharma was to actually save human lives. Now, this is also backed by economic research, which I had the privilege of learning at the University of Chicago, and Robert Hansen and Tom Sargent in their paper in 2001, which actually was part of the Nobel Prize citation, both of them Nobel laureates, who taught me at the University of Chicago, say that when faced with enormous uncertainty, the right policy is to minimize large losses. And when faced with the pandemic, that large loss was the loss of life. And that's where India, by combining what the Mahabharata advocates as the right dharma and the learning from economic and epidemiological research, implemented a very, very, very early and strict lockdown. India implemented that lockdown even before we had crossed 100 cases. Right. Because epidemiological research shows that the early lockdown is what really generates the bang for the buck. And in all this, India actually was willing to take some short-term pain for long-term gain. So that is, I think, what is the fundamental principle that has guided India's response. And, history will look back at this, and not only India, but other countries also will learn from the way in which, policy response was done in a mature manner.
Absolutely. The survey talks of an expansionary fiscal policy. What should be done to derive benefits out of such a policy?
So, first aspect that the chapter recognizes is that intrinsically there are ups and downs in an economy, and counter-cyclical fiscal policy, essentially, the idea is that when the economy is doing well, and the private sector therefore is doing well as well, the government can step back, does not need to actually spend as much. That's a good time for fiscal consolidation. But when the economy is not doing well, if it's a slowdown or a recession, that is when the government needs to step in to actually fill the void, because the private sector is typically not doing very well. So our kings and nawabs also used to implement such policies, which those of you who are from Lucknow and others also would know.
Yes, in fact, yes.
Lucknow's Imambada was built when there was a famine, in 1874 by Nawab Asafud Daula as a famine relief program. That's basically the government spending when there is a bad time. That's the basic idea that the survey is recommending.
In fact, that gave the slogan, the Jisko na de Maula usko de Asafuddola. I am from Lucknow, so I'm aware of that story, Dr. Subramaniam. But there is also a danger of inflation, you think, and what can be done about it? How serious could the threat of inflation be if the policy is expansionary?
So here's where I think, again, India's policy response was a holistic one. India recognized that the impact on the economy is both from the demand side and from the supply side. And supply side, therefore, there were a lot of reforms that were implemented, structural reforms, to ensure that supply side problems are taken care of. On the demand side, as I mentioned in my presentation as well, while the first few months when uncertainty was very high, India focused on enabling the necessities and has since then focused on enabling discretionary spending. So when demand comes back, because of supply side measures that are taken, inflation should not be that much of a problem. Secondly, if you would have noticed, the inflation in the month of December actually has moderated significantly, and it happened because food inflation moderated. It was food inflation that actually led to CPI inflation itself, and the moderation of that food inflation has in turn moderated CPI inflation. And here's where the emphasis on the agricultural reform, I think, is very important, because that really enables supply in the food economy and can thereby actually avoid episodes of inflation that translate into CPI inflation. So going forward, I do actually expect that the food inflation should ease, because it was caused by the lockdown and the impact of that on food supply. And as the unlock phase has been proceeding, I think this should definitely come under control.
There is another very important point that the survey has made about sovereign credit ratings, and that how we should not be restrained and biased by these subjective ratings. What should be done to get out of rating agencies which are not reflecting India's fundamentals?
India should focus on what is right, and that is fiscal policy and focus on growth. That's the key point.
You've also talked about that how regulatory forbearance is an emergency medicine and not a staple diet. Can you elaborate on what should be the strategy going forward for the banks in terms of the NPAs, etc.?
So the key idea here is that if emergency medicine gets converted into a staple diet, then instead of doing good to the system, it actually harms the system, and that is something that has to be avoided. During the global financial crisis, there was regulatory forbearance that was provided, and the lessons that are learned from that episode must be implemented, because there's another forbearance that has been provided now, and therefore we should ensure that timing of the withdrawal of the forbearance is such that the health of the banking sector is enabled.
Also, you talk about the process reforms, and the survey says that India overregulates the economy, which results in regulations being ineffective, even with relatively good compliance with the process. What are the steps that can be taken in order to balance discretion with transparency and not be an overregulated economy?
No, I think the first thing to understand is that, as the Nobel Prize winning research on incomplete contracts has highlighted, that real world contracts are never complete, and as a extension, therefore, real world regulations are also not complete. In our efforts to try and create a complete piece of regulation, we keep adding more and more features, and thereby make regulation very, very in excess, leads to lower to an opaque discretion in particular, and that is something. So the origin is from excessive regulation. This is something that we have to avoid.
The other thing that that the survey talks about are the major structural reforms that have been undertaken as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat package. And we've seen that in several tranches, government has announced the Atmanirbhar package. Does the survey believe that the Atmanirbhar Bharat should encourage high tariffs?
The emphasis on the survey is on, a high level of spending at this point in time. Tariff is something that the last year's economic survey had covered on the network products. The main idea was that enabling network product industries is something that is important. I think if you look at the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative, it is about two key aspects. On the tariff front. One is that the tariffs have been imposed primarily on finished goods, not on intermediate or raw materials, which basically makes export uncompetitive. Secondly, it is also important for us to take into account that fair competition is not about allowing an 18-year-old to actually compete with a 5-year-old. I think it is important that fair competition is one where the 5-year-old is allowed to grow to become an 18-year-old, but make it very clear to the 5-year-old that we're not going to pretend you to be a 5-year-old all the time.
The survey, in a very fitting manner, after the country has been through the worst of the pandemic, has said that the healthcare is finally on the center stage. Now, the survey also talks about how states have a big role to play. And we've been talking about how the share of health spend needs to increase as part of the GDP. How do you see this happening? How will the state and the center come together to achieve this goal?
So, on healthcare, because health is a state subject, the onus is a lot more on states to enhance their spending. If you look at the collective spending of center plus states, on healthcare, it is about 1% of GDP, and what the survey is saying that it needs to be increased to 2.5% of GDP, so that the out-of-pocket expenses that households have to bear, goes down from about 60% of overall healthcare spending to about 30%. That's one key aspect. Secondly, the emphasis on the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana must be continued, because that has really enabled access to healthcare for the those that did not have access to those. And finally, recognizing that this is one area where there's a lot of asymmetric information, and therefore it must be taken into account, and then regulation needs to be stepped up, because about more than 60% of healthcare activity in India happens in the private sector.
Yes. You've also talked about a sectoral regulator for regulation and supervision of the health sector. So what kind of a regulator are you suggesting?
We're drawing a parallel. For instance, if you take the banking sector, the financial, in general finance itself, it's a regulated sector because there's a lot of asymmetric information problems, and which leads to failure of markets, of free markets, just free markets. A similar, thing is also required in healthcare. Countries across the globe have actually now recognized this, and therefore, have gone towards having a sectoral regulator. I think that is important in the healthcare context as well.
The survey has laid out our strengths and also some of the challenges that we are facing, suggesting some very specific measures that the government has to take in terms of its fiscal policy, not bothered about what the credit rating agencies are saying, and also continue on this growth path with investment in infrastructure, healthcare sector, and also the structural reforms as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat package that need to be taken forward. Thank you so much, Dr. Subramaniam, for taking out the time and putting in perspective so many ideas that have been put forth in this economic survey. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You were listening to an interview with Chief Economic Advisor Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian on Economic Survey 2020-21. The interviewer was journalist Ruchika Chitravanshi. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on a mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.
This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on economic survey. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist.
Mr. Bhattacharya, my first question to you, what is the biggest takeaway from the economic survey for fiscal year 2020-2021?
The biggest takeaway from the economic survey for 2020-21 is about what is going to be the fiscal policy strategy for not only next year, but also a couple of years ahead. I will explain to you why I say that. This survey has been presented just 3 days before the budget for 2021-22 will be presented in Parliament, that is on Monday, 1st February. Now, there has been a debate that preceded it and still continuing, which is that should the government be spending more money or not to not only revive growth, but also capitalize on the early signs of recovery that one has seen in different parts of the economy. As you would know, that the current year, the government's expenditure, additional expenditure has been very, very small on the government account. The government account additional expenditure is just about less than 2% of GDP. And even if you take a look at the government expenditure in the current year so far, for which data is available till November, the increase in government's total expenditure compared to what the government spent in the same time in 2019-20, the increase is only about less than 5%. So there is this debate going on, and I think the economic survey sets at rest this debate over should the government be spending more or not. Economic survey in unequivocal terms says that there is need for maintaining an expansionary fiscal policy. In plain English language, this means that the government should not really worry about its fiscal deficit. That is, to my mind, is the biggest takeaway. And along with that, it says that if you want to take advantage of the revenue buoyancy that is likely to happen because of 11% real terms growth that is expected next year, you must maintain expenditure support and initiate more reforms. So this, to my mind, is the biggest takeaway from the economic survey that was presented a day ago.
Mr. Bhattacharya, you are talking about fiscal expansion, but do you think that we have room available for that?
The question that we need to address here is that does the government have the wherewithal to finance the higher expenditure that the economic survey recommends that the government must? Two issues there. One is the survey answers because it projects a real terms economic growth of around 11%. And also a nominal growth of a little over 15%. Now, remember that on a nominal growth of around contraction of 4% in the current year, your revenues are falling short of the targets by huge margin. But normally, if given the tax buoyancy rate that we have seen, if the nominal growth is around 15%, I would imagine that there will be some extra revenue buoyancy that you will see in the economy because economy will, after all, will be coming back to its earlier pre-pandemic or the pace of economic activity. So that is one, that you will get some more revenue arising out of higher growth. That is number one. Number two, what the survey will not say but probably will hint at is the possibility or the room for extra mobilization of revenues, not just through tax and non-tax measures, but also through asset sales. Actually, not both. The three areas that I mentioned. One is the tax revenue side, second is the non-tax revenue side, third is the asset sales, which is the disinvestment side. Remember that in the current financial year, the disinvestment or the asset sale performance has been very poor for understandable reasons. But given the fact that the LIC IPO, the BP sale, and probably the Air India sale, and along with the government's public sector policy that the government will not allow any non-strategic sector to have more than two public sector companies, so which means that a long list of public sector companies probably will have to go for an outright sale, in other words, privatization, in other words, which means more revenue for the government. So asset sales side, you can see some extra revenue. From the non-tax revenue side, whose share in GDP and whose share in the total government revenue has unfortunately been falling, probably needs some sort of support by extra attention so that the non-tax revenues go up. The question of the fees, even as simple as thing like how much do you charge for the UPSC examination system or how much do you charge for direct-to-home broadcast services. Now, these are all non-tax revenues, and I think the survey has not categorically said this, but there is a clear room for raising more revenues for non-tax revenues. Similarly, the tax revenue, a potentially controversial issue, because the budget is something which is secret, which we'll know on Monday only. But my sense is that, yes, there is room for additional taxation measures in areas which have seen smart recovery and significant capital gains, even at a time when the other parts of the economy have not done too well.
And do you think that there is any scope for a new cess or even surcharge? Because people are talking about one of the options for having additional resources is through cess. And we also understand that because of the 15th Finance Commission recommendation, there will be need for permanent fund for defense sector, and for that you also need some additional revenue. So do you support the idea of raising money through cess or surcharge?
I think in a post-COVID year, an idea of a COVID cess or surcharge or even a COVID bond are ideas that are definitely worth look. Whether it will be a COVID bond, which would mean that it will give the people an opportunity to invest in those sovereign bonds, and the government will raise some revenues out of that. So it will only mean the government will have to give some interest payments, and a lot of people with so much money sloshing around in the economy will go in for those COVID bonds. So one possibility is to raise revenues through a COVID bond. Second possibility that you mentioned is a COVID cess or a COVID surcharge. I would say if there is a COVID cess and COVID surcharge, it should have an automatic sunset clause of a 1-year periodicity. Otherwise, it might create an impression that the government is taking the economy to a direction which is opposite to what it had promised, which is a low-tax economy. But the COVID surcharge and the COVID cess give the government some revenues, and the COVID bond will certainly give the government the benefit of resources which mobilize from surpluses that people, corporate entities, even the banks would like to maybe park their money in COVID bonds because these are sovereign bonds. So I think there are various ways of raising revenues, but an important thing would be not to send out a message or a signal by which the demand recovery or the pace of economic activity, they get dampened. So one has to tread this area with a lot of caution.
Coming back to the fiscal expansion, one of the key things is the borrowing. And we all know that during the current fiscal, the domestic borrowing was almost 12 lakh crore. Another area which we saw is the external financing. And this year we have saw a surge of almost 900% during the April-December period. And we are touching almost 40,000 crore rupees. And expectation is that it could touch up to 55,000 crore rupees. Do you think that the time has come to reconsider the proposal of sovereign bond which was proposed some time back?
When the sovereign bond idea was mooted about a year and a half ago, I think it kicked up a kind of a controversy. It raised concerns over the Indian economy or the Indian government's exposure to risks arising of external financing of the government activity to that extent. Even without those sovereign bonds, as you rightly pointed out, the government's share in external financing in overall borrowing requirement of the government has seen dramatic rise. My view is at this point in time, it's a small amount compared to overall borrowing level of 12 lakh crore. But I think given the fact that you are exposing the sovereign to international financial risks, I would tread such a path very cautiously. And most important thing is that you must borrow it for productive purposes. But unfortunately, we have not always borrowed only for productive purposes. So therefore, one has to tread it with caution. Having said that, let me also say that the economic survey does prepare the ground for more external financing for meeting the fiscal deficit by raising this issue of how international credit rating agencies have actually not done justice inherent fundamentals of the Indian economy and how their ratings do not reflect the basic strength of the Indian economy, the kind of factors that go into the rating of other countries at a similar stage of economic development have not been extended to the Indian economy. So I think the survey touch upon this issue in an indirect way and probably suggest that the rating agencies not being fair to us. So in such a situation, as long as they are not being fair, India going in for a more external financing to meet its budget deficit probably is slightly prone to risks.
Yesterday when Chief Economic Advisor was making a presentation, he said that the real issue is the ability to repay and willingness to repay. And on both the account, we are very good. We are almost following the golden rules. We haven't defaulted once. But the real issue is that when the rating agencies take decision, they also consider, or rather I say, fiscal deficit is one of the parameters for deciding about the rating. And when we are talking about fiscal expansion, are we running towards a kind of risk where the rating agencies will have a much more cautious eye on the sovereign?
I could agree with you more, which is I was suggesting that we must tread this path with tremendous caution. caution, because you can probably go in for a higher borrowing within the country and manage that risk internally. But if you allow that borrowing to be diversified and sourced from international, the capital market or the pension funds and all that, then you are exposing the country's domestic financing to risks that you otherwise would not have if you continue to spend more, incur more debt. So on the one hand, you need to spend more, you need to go in for more debt. Remember that the economic survey is also saying that the 15th Finance Commission will most probably lay out a new roadmap for the government's fiscal consolidation road plans, and not only for the center but also for the states. That's a very important recommendation that the Finance Commission, the economic survey has made, that the fiscal consolidation roadmap is relevant not just for the center but also for the states. Now, this fiscal consolidation roadmap, adhering to them, even if they are relaxed, even if the government of India has debt to GDP ratio of more than 40%, right now it is close to 70% or so after what the borrowing has happened. Now, even when those borrowing excesses happen, my sense is that the country risk is more manageable than if that borrowing takes place to the external financing route, because the international financing bodies can be very punishing. They will be merciless, and true that we have got a wonderful track record of not defaulting ever on meeting our international payment obligation.
And one of the suggestions which the economic survey has talked about is the more spending on the health. Since we know that health is a state subject, so do you think that it is more of a state responsibility than the center's responsibility of pushing the money or putting the money for the health one?
Important question on health, because the survey does talk about the health issues, but remember that even as it is a state issue, the center cannot remain oblivious to the challenges that arise on the health sector, and which is why the economic survey has underlined not just the need for raising the health expenditure to GDP ratio from the current level of 1% or so to 2.5% and 3% of GDP over a period of time, and that it is underlined. And then number two important point the economic survey talks about is the need to create sectoral regulators for the healthcare delivery system. Right now, we do not have a proper regulatory system that oversees the manner in which the health infrastructure is rolled out, healthcare services are rolled out. So therefore, the suggestion that we need to have a proper regulatory mechanism, that is very, very important, and that too, I would say, important takeaway from the economic survey. Hopefully, the government will respond to these suggestions in a positive way. And along with that the survey also makes two very important suggestions. One is that India should not be over-regulated and under-governed. So it talks about process reforms, it talks about procedure reforms, and the second more important point is that it says that regulatory forbearance cannot be a staple diet. It can only be an emergency medicine. And I think this point is a very, very important point at a time when there is a tendency in the part of many regulators and many bodies, even some people within the government are talking about moratoria to be extended indefinitely, loan adjustments to be extended, NPA norms can be overlooked. At that point in time, the economic survey is saying that yes, regulatory forbearance is okay as an emergency medicine, but cannot be a staple diet. It's a very, very important warning, and I sincerely hope that the government adheres to it, listens to it, and only uses regulatory forbearance as emergency medicine and not as a staple diet.
Mr. Bhattacharya, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on economic survey. The participants were A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.
This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on self-reliance in defense production, procurement of Tejas and other initiatives. The participants are Ashok Tandon, political analyst, and Manas Bhuyan, journalist.
The government of India has taken a series of initiatives in the last few months to boost domestic defense industry. Ashokji, how do you see the government's initiatives to boost the domestic defense industry? The government has taken forward a very, very ambitious program under which we are planning to produce very, very significant military assets, including warships, helicopters, and fighter aircraft in India. So how do you see the overall focus of the government India's defense modernization program?
As we all know, the Modi government has been very conscious about the growing complexities of security challenges in India's neighborhood. And also, to safeguard these interests, we require strong defense capabilities. The fact that India, over the last decade or so, has been one of the world's largest arms importers. It's about 12% of the global arms imports. India is the market. But in order to promote self-reliance in defense production, the Modi government has announced a several series of measures under the Atmanirbhar Abhiyan. So he has been talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat in every respect. And therefore, our defense reforms have been long overdue. So that to make India truly self-reliant in defense production and defense manufacturing, series of steps have been taken, as you very rightly said. And also, let's not forget that defense preparedness is very significant. And self-reliance in defense manufacturing is a crucial component of our effective defense capability. And to maintain national sovereignty and achieve military superiority. So the attainment of all this will ensure strategic independence, cost-effective defense equipment, and it will also help to save on defense import bill, so that, the funds could be utilized for social infrastructure and other infrastructure, etc. So having said that, I think now what has been done is very significant, particularly the recent announcement by the cabinet that now, as we all know, India has already produced as indigenous light combat aircraft Tejas. And now the announcement has been made that 48,000 crores have been announced by the Cabinet Committee on Security on Wednesday for procurement and acquisition of 83 light combat aircraft, that is Tejas, and that too from the state-run Hindustan Aeronautics. And this is the biggest contract awarded to India's own military aviation industry. So this is very significant, and it will certainly boost India's self-reliance in the defense production and will also make India a manufacturing hub for export of the defense equipment. As the Prime Minister recently said, that India has the potential to become a reliable weapon supplier to friendly foreign nations, as well as strengthen India's strategic partnership and consolidate its role as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean, as it takes steps towards self-reliance in defense sector. So that is the spirit which we are talking about, and it is part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat, which the Prime Minister very rightly said that it is not an inward-looking mission, but it's aimed at making the global economy resilient and strong, as well as promoting world peace. So all India's defense preparedness, whether it was a nuclear program of Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, all is for self-defense and also to ensure world peace, because if we have a deterrent in defense production and defense capabilities.
I would like to specifically ask you about the CCS clearance, Cabinet Committee on Security's clearance to the 48,000 crore Tejas program. So it will involve, according to officials, around 500 companies, and it will definitely support a large number of youth. They will get jobs in those companies. So how do you see this overall impact of this massive indigenous aircraft development program, and how it will help India economically, how it will help India's defense sector, smaller companies? So how do you see its overall impact on India's economy?
See, if we look at India's war against COVID-19, now it has brought about a special, consciousness within the country, and also a special focus on self-reliance, whether it is in the medical terms or whether it is defense terms. So manufacturing is the cornerstone of self-reliance. And in that context, the Ministry of Defense, as you know, opened its doors for private sector. and then gradually the foreign direct investment into the defense sector was opened up, and the defense revised policy which the government announced was that Make in India initiative in defense sector. That is the mantra of the Modi government, and the initiative of Make in India is basically to speed up the procurement process for the defense also. And broadly, if you classify this, not only buy and make, leasing, and then also make it for exports. So that has been the Defense Ministry's program, and as we all know that in the defense equipment area, the delays that have been historically been an area of concern for India's procurement. We know whenever there have been conflicts or wars, the defense equipment delivery, if it is delayed, then obviously it becomes a cause of concern. And therefore, India started building its own light combat aircraft, we all know, and not only that, but several other measures were announced as part of the India's self-reliance in defense production, and we know that the import embargo was imposed on defense equipment. The Ministry of Defense, took a decision to introduce an import embargo on 101 defense equipment, and to be, implemented obviously progressively till 2024. And now when we talk about the light combat aircraft Tejas, the procurement, as I said earlier, 48,000 crores to strengthen Air Force fleet of the light combat aircraft, and the cabinet took that decision. Obviously, when we are going to manufacture 83 Tejas in India by Hindustan Aeronautics, obviously it will give a big boost to the Indian economy, whether it is in job creation, because so many components of this aircraft will be produced in India, and it will help in ancillary industry also, and certainly it will boost the Indian economy.
Tandonji, the Prime Minister has been particularly focusing on boosting the domestic defense production. The Defense Expo in 2020 in Lucknow, the Prime Minister had called upon the stakeholders to work very hard, and he had set a target of rupees 1.75 lakh crore of turnover in defense manufacturing by 2025. And he had assured all the stakeholders of the government's full support in their endeavor to produce world-class military platforms in India. So do you think this 1.75 lakh crores of defense turnover by 2025 is a realistic target? Will India be able to reach the target?
The Prime Minister touched upon in that address various aspects of self-reliance in defense sector, and when he was speaking in UP, there was an emphasis on decentralization of the defense manufacturing industry to different parts of the country. And that is why UP was particularly mentioned in the Prime Minister's speech, becoming another hub of the defense production units. So the role of the domestic defense industry and the steps taken by the government to transform India into a global hub for defense manufacturing and reform, so that is also part of the ease of doing business. So I think Prime Minister right from the beginning has been emphasizing on India making self-reliant, and also not only make in India, but also make in India and going global also. That has been, one of the initiatives. And we do hope that once in foreign direct investment comes and there are joint ventures in various aspects of the defense production, so the job creation will be there, and it will be in different parts of the country.
Various reform initiatives, including increasing the FDI limit from 49% to 74% under the automatic route, and generate a year-wise negative list of weapons which won't be imported. So do you think these measures will attract foreign direct investment into India? And how do you think, in fact, considering the complex security scenario around India's neighborhood, do you think it will make a difference in having a strong defense capability to deal with the emerging security threat than relying entirely on imported platforms? Will it make any difference in India's national doctrine in dealing with challenging scenarios and dealing with overall long-term perspective in making India a strong country in terms of taking on various challenges in India's neighborhood?
If you look at in the last 5 years or so, the Modi government has approved over 200 defense acquisition proposals with a transfer of technology provision, and it is valued around 4 trillion. But most are still in relatively early stages of processing. And, India has 4 companies. We are talking only about the Hindustan Aeronautics, Indian Ordnance Factories, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, Bharat Electronics Limited, BEL, and Bharat Dynamics Limited, BDL. These are among the top 10 biggest arm producers in the world. And all 4 of these Indian companies are in public sector. That is very, very significant thing. And they account for the bulk of the domestic armament demand. So government usually have tended to privilege defense public sector units over the private sector. And despite the Make in India, these companies have been given a big boost. And poor design capability in critical technologies, inadequate investment in R&D, and inability to manufacture major subsystems and components hamper the indigenous manufacturing. And therefore, the relationship between the R&D establishment, production agencies, and the end user are extremely weak. That is the situation. And in that context, the creation of a manufacturing base is capital and technology intensive and has a long period. So therefore, the policy of encouraging the foreign direct investment up to 79% is a major step in that direction. So therefore, and we all know that any factory to reach optimum levels of capacity utilization, it could take anywhere between 5 to 10 years or even maybe 15 years. And by the time a unit commences production, any of the developments can take place. So in that context, newer technologies could make the products, and all these shortcomings will certainly take care of the policy. And we all know that apart from defense manufacturing, etc., and some other steps were also taken by this government, like the appointment of the Chief of Defense Staff. And that now the role of the CDS would also be to examine the defense acquisitions from a tri-services angle, and this may avoid delays. At the same time, people of India would feel secure that our borders are secured, and our armed forces are well equipped to meet any challenge from any side of the border, whether it is the land route, whether it is air defense, or whether it is naval defense. So in that context, all the measures which have been taken will put India on top, and the message is very loud and clear to our neighbors, particularly the recent decision of the Cabinet Committee on Security about the light combat aircraft is a very, very clear and loud signal to whosoever it may matter that India's defense preparedness is complete and our armed forces are fully equipped. So there will be no let-up in the defense preparedness. And the Government of India is willing to go any length to sanction defense budget. And for that matter, there is a sense of confidence among India's defense services, defense forces, that the government is fully backing them, and therefore they can defend India and India's borders in a very secure manner.
So thank you, Mr. Tandon, for a detailed and in-depth overview of India's defense modernization program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on self-reliance in defense production, procurement of Tejas and other initiatives. The participants were Ashok Tandon, political analyst, and Manas Bhuyan, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.
This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight now, we bring you a discussion on National Girl Child Day Ensuring Equal Opportunities. The participants are Dr. Ranjana Kumari, Director, Center for Social Research, and Aditi Tandon, journalist.
India has been celebrating the National Girl Child Day since 2008. Ranjana ji, this year the theme is draw the attention of all citizens towards the fact that the child sex ratio in the country is declining very fast. Prime Minister Narendra Modi today hailing the women and girl power of India with the hashtag Desh Ki Beti. What is your overall view?
Any nation, if you want to really assess its level of development, then you have to look at their women and girl children especially. And when we see 5 issues on which India every time has been pushed down by the UN Development Indicator, most important, the question of girl children. What I'm saying is that one, that, we are having less girl 5 age group, less than boys, children who are born and survive, especially in the context of female child sex ratio is declining. And then the other issues which are very important to pay attention to are the education of girl children. It has been a big challenge to make them enter the school. In fact, the entry in the school has increased, but at the same time, retention in the school after primary to middle level has still been very, very challenging. Now, the third very important issue which we know about the health of girl children, especially when they reach the menstrual age. And then all kinds of question of health and hygiene comes very, very clearly before all of us. Important thing to note at this stage during especially COVID pandemic is the increase in the girl-child marriage. We have dramatic increase which has happened because a lot of girl children have dropped out of the school, and as a result, this has become really, really a major challenge for all of us to deal with. And in future, this is going to create more problem because all these children who've got married will face the cycle of violence, bad health, unemployment and everything else. Now also, finally, I would say the fifth challenge which is before us in terms of education is skill of the girl children. If they go through normal education process, they do not acquire skill which can give them any kind of economic possibility in future, and they can stand on their own feet. So these are the things I feel are very important, these 5 challenges before us in the context of girl children. Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao has been a very important initiative of government. We have participated working in 5 districts of Haryana. Fortunately, very intensive work and our comprehensive strategy has worked, and the data is now changing in favor of the girl children. But still, it's a huge, huge challenge before us because now the next census is going to come just within this year. It should start now. And then we will have to see how much all these efforts has really made sense at the end of the day.
A very important report was brought out by the Ministry of Statistics and Implementation a while ago, and it had projected that although in 2011 census, the sex ratio of the country was 939, which is 939 women as against 1,000 men. It is projected to actually fall to 898 by 2031. You have been working on the ground with the government in terms of the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao Andolan, and the messaging has been very sharp. The Prime Minister himself had launched that program. Is the law failing us because long-term projections don't seem to be improving yet?
There are multiple reasons, of course. I have been also member of the PCPNDT board, which makes the assessment. Unfortunately, meetings have not taken place to review for almost over a year now, where we would get information from all over the country, from all the states, about the number of cases detected in terms of sex selection, the kind of nursing homes which are really engaging themselves in it, and also doctors, sonographers. All those information will be collated together and presented, and we came up with many strategies in the past. But pandemic again has, in our own experience, slowed down the whole process of that the appropriate authority at the district level has not been as proactive. Everything has been left to ASHA workers. Now that's not really having much impact because they have very little say in the system. So certainly we may get a big shocker when the new census comes, especially in certain states. I would say the picture will never the same in everywhere in the country, but in some states we may get a big shocker that the really sex ratio has further gone down. But certain states have done definitely better, where implementation has been robust. That would mean that law has been implemented. People who engage in gender-based sex selection have been punished, where we have had, regular meetings because every quarter you are supposed to meet and review. So the states which have gone for regular meeting and agencies like us, which have gone to the grassroots level and tried to create the groups of community people, elected women representative, elderly of the village. So this kind of
group has helped in really doing a good public campaign. But, pandemic again has been a big blocker in terms of what we could do really in terms of public campaigns. So I would think that unless the law is really very, very seriously implemented and a lot of people get punished for doing this practice is not going to be stopped. And it's not just the practices because we have the mindset. We have some preference mindset which is changing but not really changing the way it should be changing in terms of welcoming the girl children. Still, we are not welcoming our girl children, and that is why a lot of parents go for sex-selective abortions.
Ranjana ji, there's a very important research that has taken place. Although we know already that women tend to live longer than men almost everywhere in the world, in some countries by more than a decade. But now we also know through study of centuries of historical records that women don't just outlive men in normal times, they are also more likely to survive the worst of circumstances, especially famines and epidemics. Do you think the women workforce and women generally would survive the pandemic better, and that would be one way of going forward?
Well, initially the data was, you saw a lot of reports, and I think where during pandemic, because women start with weak health, and that starts as girl children's health. And that is why I'm saying that if we want a robust country, we want our country to be seen and also, be a developed country, then we have to invest a lot in girl children. Because, this not only in terms of having the future generations who have better health in terms of having their ability to produce children, but becoming stronger and healthier mothers, but also capacity as workers, capacity as human resource for a country. If we want to ensure all that, then we have to invest in them as very young. So there are different growth phases for children, and we know it that from 0 to 5, if you are going to look after them and give them a level of protein, nutrition, and it's not just feeding them the right food, feeding them the right amount of protein, feeding them the right amount of vitamins, minerals. I think those are the things which needs to be still. Again, the Anganwadi work really got a very big setback during this period. We have worked during pandemic as COVID-1 and COVID-2 recovery programs, and we know that there was big difficulty that was faced by Asha and Anganwadi workers. They are the first point of contact who really reach out to girl children. They have all the information about the health of girl children. So I think they found it difficult and the programs were not managed very well during this period. And I'm flagging this issue to let the policymakers know that, they should get back to it now and try to streamline it and make it as effective as possible. Also, one reason when we don't invest in young girl children about their health, then we saw in pandemic, India is the only country where women died more than men during the pandemic. As a result, you can see what happens when you don't invest in women's health as girl children's health.
No, actually, we have looked at the Ministry of Health case fatality rate and mortality data for COVID. I would differ with you here because they do tend to say that males died more than females even in the pandemic. But your larger point is very well taken that investments in this sector have to begin. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the fear of violence against the girl child is also, one reason why a lot of mothers become complicit in getting rid of the girl infant. And a lot of studies from the rural heartland have actually proved that because women who bear girl children suffer domestic violence much more than anybody else, they ultimately become a party to this kind of discrimination against girl child. Is there any data from your own studies to that effect? Because that is a major mindset issue because violence against women is increasing by the day.
I think it's important let me go back to my point about women dying more. I think still the data is disputed because the data which came to us about 3.3% women dying and 2.7% men dying was from an international agency, and of course then Health Ministry has contradicted that data by some research that has been done. Anyway, we can leave that alone, but I think it's important to note and underline that when girl children are getting married as young brides, then the possibility of violence on them increases because their vulnerability and dependence on husband, on their family is much more, and then the possibility of their getting exploited is much higher, and that is why you can see, and also then they become young mothers. and mothers at a very, very early age, then certainly that's also a form of violence actually. Why push a woman's body at that immature, unprepared age to go and produce children? I think this is also a form of violence, but a lot of us are accepting it as natural as girl-child, marriage. I think it's not normal, should not be accepted. And the increase in the, again, if I quote some data, we have lots of data collated together, but because also as a political scientist and as a researcher, I would not really quote any data because this is just 19% more girl children have got married during this period. But then these are the data which are coming from sources may not be acceptable to a lot of policymakers because still we don't have a very comprehensive research done during this period. But observations, lot of activists who have gone around the country, a lot of women organizations have observed this and they have reported all this data about girl children and getting many more marriages of girl children happening. So I would still say that these 5 issues, investing in education of girl children, our investment in health and education still has not crossed more than 3%. So I think now this pandemic should teach us that we have to invest a lot in girl children's health and education. That means investment should be doubled at least, if not tripled. And also that we have to look at the other social evil side, which is the girl-child marriage, also skilling girl children, which is extremely important. Education is not enough unless there is good skilling happening from the very early age among them, so that they have a possibility of earning their livelihood. And then once they are on their own feet, certainly chances of violence reduces.
Very important finding by the International Institute of Population Sciences, yes, which actually does give us some hope going forward, Ranjana ji. They performed a 3-decade study of the National Family Health Survey data recently, and they published a very interesting paper where they said that although the dominance and preference for sons continues to some extent, but the scale of previous rigidity around the mindset of not having girls at all is now gradually waning. Even in high son preference states of Punjab, Haryana and Maharashtra, they actually found that the proportion of couples with only 2 daughters who accepted sterilization grew between National Family Health Survey 1, which was conducted in 1992, to NFHS 4, which was conducted in 2016. So that's a very interesting trend. So that means somewhere we are succeeding.
Sure. That's where we take a little bit of credit for very intensive work for so many years as nodal agency in Haryana. And I told you the district we work, data has reversed. And the data has reversed means that there has been an impact on the mindset of people about son preference. But overall, when you look at the country, UP, Bihar, Odisha, states which have Madhya Pradesh, we have so many cases which have come to our notice about violence against women, about, girl-child marriage, Rajasthan, there are critical states. And I think in this phase, it is important, and especially on the Girl-Child Day, we should reinforce our will to really directly make plans where direct benefit reaches to girl children and the issues which are really critical in the context of girl children are addressed, especially in the states which are critical states. So that very area focus, strategic focus has to be kept in mind when we want to go and make some change in the states. But there are certainly, you are absolutely right, and I've gone through the research study that you're quoting, and certainly mindset to some extent has changed, I would say. But there is a long way to go.
On that note, Ranjana ji, wishing you all the best in your endeavors and hoping that the child sex ratio trend reverse very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on National Girl Child Day, ensuring equal opportunities. The participants were Dr. Ranjana Kumari, Director, Center for Social Research, and Aditi Tandon, Journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.
This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on National Voters' Day, making our voters empowered, vigilant, safe and informed. The participants are Akshay Raut, former Director General of Election Commission of India, and Neelab Srivastav, journalist.
July 25th is observed and celebrated as the National Voters' Day. It was this date in 1950 that the Election Commission of India marked its foundation day. This was also a day before India became a republic. The aim of the National Voters' Day, this is the 11th edition this time, is to encourage, facilitate and maximize the enrollment of the voters, especially the new ones who have or are just attaining the eligible voting age of 18 years.
National Voters' Day is the flagship and most iconic program and intervention that Election Commission and the election management in the country has. And it has a very deep and critical meaning. We need to go a little bit to the background. When India became independent, unlike many other countries in Europe and other parts of the West and even in other countries, there was immediately a handover of power to the people in practical sense. The founding fathers of Indian Constitution gave the right to rule to the people themselves through adult franchise. There was no difference between caste, between age, between gender, but it was given universal adult suffrage. It's a big gamble because India's literacy was not very high. After partition, the level of poverty was very high. So a lot of people across the world are very skeptical. But founding fathers had confidence in people. So it was given to people. Then there has been periodic, correct, and credible elections from 1950-51 onwards. So it has been going on very well. India is the largest functional democracy. But is that sufficient? If in Indian polling, the type of voters turnout is like 45, 50, 55 or occasionally 60, that doesn't reflect a full potential of democracy. So, Election Commission of India got down to this task more actively from 2009-2010 onwards. That is why in 2011, you found something like National Voters' Day. The intention is to get all the people of the country to register, whoever is eligible. And those who register, all of them should vote. These are the twin purposes in a way. Particularly the National Voters' Day is to maximize enrollment, all types, particularly the young and newly eligible voters who are now 18 plus and who enroll. That is why about perhaps 2 crore voters have been enrolled in this last year of revision. And 200 million have been enrolled between, say, 2009 general election and 2019. There is a massive emphasis on the participation, which started with a program called SWEEP, Systematic Voters Education and Electoral Participation. That started in the year 2010. And National Voters' Day, which is to recognize new enrollment, mobilize them, and get them on board, is happened on 2011. So we have completed 10 years, and the Honorable President of India presided over the event today. And this really touches the heart how the young are getting involved, like giving, you said about activity, giving the epic cards to newly enrolled voters, that itself has a huge symbolism. And with that also other things got added, like giving national awards to those who have done best in election, particularly in difficult COVID-19 times in Bihar and other places. Also make sure that the aspects like security, IT, outreach, and also the expenditure control, these also get due focus. The qualitative aspects of election also get a focus on National Voters' Day. It is basically all said and done to put things in a succinct manner. It is bringing back the focus on the most important part of elections, which is people. Because you and I should know, and our listeners I'm sure will know, that elections do not belong to the Election Commission. They don't belong to political parties. They belong to the people. The heart and soul of Indian elections and democracy is in the people. So if people are not involved, I mean, it's just like a stadium without the player. You just line up EVM and put the people in the queue and people go and vote in 5%, 10%, 20%. So these have been somehow been tried to taken care of in the instrument of National Voters' Day, and there has been sufficient improvement in all types of electoral participation in the last 10 years, and the country and the electoral process, which Lady Hillary Clinton described as the gold standard of election management in the world, I think has a reason to be proud of.
The President, Mr. Ramnath Kovind, as you mentioned, did address the 11th National Voter Day celebrations today in New Delhi. He spoke to the delegates and to the Election Commission via virtual medium. And if I can quote the President, his speech was centered around the valuable right to vote. The President did say that the right to vote is not a simple right. People around the world have struggled a lot for this. And since independence, our Constitution has given equal voting rights to all the citizens without discrimination on the basis of merit, religion, race or caste. I think the inclusive feeling of the country and voting as one, I think that is what the President was speaking about, and that is what the entire scheme of elections in the country mean, Mr. Rao.
That philosophy, the Honorable President has so nicely portrayed it in his address. That is the core of Indian democracy functioning, that everyone, a single vote counts. It's not a coincidence that in election management, even there is a polling booth for a single voter in many places. And now this inclusiveness, Election Commission has taken to the next step forward. You know, there are three things. one is information, one is motivation, one facilitation. These are the three things on which rests the total story of voters' participation in Indian elections. People must know what, when, where and how. People must be motivated. They must know the reason why they are voting, and they must be looking forward very eagerly to the time of the polls. And then secondly, as much we can facilitate Indian electors, still it is less. We must give them all minimum facilities, whether it is a shade from the sun, the water in the queue, or even people who come with child in their arms, like a creche for them. We have gone into the new era of model polling booth. We have gone into the new era of mobile polling booths, say for Buddhist monks. So there are gradually the election management working on bringing the migrant voters, the NRI voters into the fold. Basically, the facilitation is not a limited exercise. People who are on the frontier, our soldiers, their voting must be made very smooth and friendly. So all these three aspects, IMF, they are moving together, and that gives actually a functional right. What President talked about is a right which is in principle, which is great. But to operationalize it is not easy. It requires a lot of hard work, and election management is doing. I'll give you another example. We now went through the COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully we're gradually getting to overcome. Many parts of the world were reluctant to hold an election. But in Bihar, it was the largest election ever in COVID-19 times. There was scare. There was apprehension. But things moved with a lot of preparation. The health department was by the side. Social distancing was kept. The masks were on. But at the same time, we got a record voting. That shows the inner faith of Indian people in democracy practice and democratic elections. And that is what the whole right is all about. Now, I would add one element of responsibility. We have a voters' pledge which talks about to vote using our conscience, using our proper ethical, moral scape, by not taking into account divisive things like caste, creed, money power, undue influence and all that. So from the voter side, that has to be an exercise in which there is a purity in the exercise of voting. Right and responsibility both put together can fulfill our Indian democratic elections much more than ever before.
You were talking about the kind of facilitation that the Election Commission does, and talking about COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen how hugely we have relied on technology, and the Election Commission also, by way of technology, is trying to ease and smoothen the process of polling and the entire electoral process as such. We are talking about now, very soon the Election Commission is launching the e-EPIC, or the electronic elector voter ID card. The first time the electoral photo picture cards were launched in 1993, and also about remote voting. So I think, Mr. Raut, is this to ensure that the smooth, fair and inclusive elections are, with the help of technology, is taken to the every nook and corner of the country? As you said, there are cases where even polling booth has been established even for one voter.
Technology is the best facilitation, as we all know. And COVID-19 has proved it more than ever before. And in India, the election management has to touch something like 93 crore voters, electors on a roll, if I am not incorrect. So with that type of scale, it is not easy to do most of the things offline. So we are going to online mode. EVM in itself was a starting marvelous and most important starting point of use of technology to facilitate a large election. Sometimes there is a question that why certain countries are not using it. Look at their scale. We are the size of elector which combines many continents' population. So if we don't have the EVM, we spend tons and tons and tons of paper and we keep counting them night after night after night. So that was the starting point. Now, with a huge power backup of IT in a country like India, if we don't go for e-EPIC, which has been launched today, so then what all technology is for? And with Aadhaar having come up, I think we are going to see a very new era of technology-based elections in the coming days. But one thing cannot be forgotten is safety and security of election, because the single vote, the people's mandate, is respected so much, and that holds so important in the process of election. Technology, when it is being used, has to be done in a manner that there is no breach of security of voting. That's one important point. That is why I think the Election Commission and the management has been taking every step with a lot of care. The remote voting, the internet voting after that, and people pressing a button to vote from some place. All these are being seen in the context of how security and secrecy of voting can also be maintained. For example, we had certain doubts about EVM. So the VVPAT came on, and VVPAT has become a force multiplier in making sure, because finally it is the credibility or it is the perception. Caesar's wife, as they say, has to be above suspicion. You must not be doing correctly. You must also be seen doing correctly. That is why any amount of thing done to trust between the election process and the people who are the voters, it is definitely deserving. And the use of technology can do it more and more and more.
Apart from facilitating the voters by various means by ensuring that the nearest polling booth to any voter is as close as possible, the Commission also has a very important role in ensuring a fair playing field for everyone. And that is where the role of checking on the black money, curbing of various illegal inducements, putting up, I remember, apps like C-Vigil. So I think that is also a very important role for the Election Commission, Mr. Rao.
We will see all these type of reforms from election to election because management learns from one election and puts it into work in the next. I think that's a great piece of evolution that we have seen in election management. If you remember, I would attract the attention of the listeners to the fact that not long ago, there was the problem of muscle men, the booth capturing. The muscle power used to hijack a part of Indian elections, particularly in certain states. It used to happen more. But that is a matter of past. With EVM and enforcement of security, that is gone. No one is talking about snatching of the ballot boxes and all that. And with EVM coming, it all became a matter of even much more of the past. But the other thing which is yet to be tackled is political finance. The expenditure control or expenditure management. How much money is coming into elections? Is it pure money? Are those being accounted? Is there an undue influence happening in the financial transactions that happens at the time of elections? So these are definitely certain things which are occupying the Commission's mind. We are also looking at how there is a bad use or evil use or misuse of the huge outreach that has been possible by the social media and how it can complicate the atmosphere. We started with dealing with trade news. The Commission at one point of time started dealing with trade news. Now it is fake news, all types of influence that can come in social media. So these are new challenges which also come with technology. But I think the Commission's heart is in the right place and it is focused on areas as they come from year to year. And when you go to the next 5 elections, I am sure we will see also new experimentations. Like we have seen in Bihar election focused around COVID-19 protocol. We'll see much more in the coming elections and I am sure that the election management is on a sound and continuous improvement track.
One important aspect that I picked from what you said, Mr. Raut, was about the COVID-19 pandemic. You did touch about the kind of preparations that the Commission did while conducting the assembly polls in Bihar last year when the pandemic was raging, and in also Panchayat elections in Jammu and Kashmir. The COVID-19 or the coronavirus has still not gone away, and we are looking at elections in 4 states and 1 union territory, which is West Bengal, Assam, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Puducherry. Specifically on COVID-19, Commission had taken various measures like increasing the polling booth so that distancing between the voters is ensured, sanitization and ensured, and also the overall arrangement of the security forces. These are also 2 very important roles when it comes to conducting elections in such a state where the entire globe is now battling the pandemic. We are in the vaccine stage, but still the pandemic is still here.
You have said it all. I don't have to add much because yes, there was a lot of learning how to handle a big election in COVID-19 times. It happened in Bihar. I'm sure the Bihar election experience will go to these 5 elections and more. More importantly, we are a country in a vaccination mode now. Vaccination mode has its own complexities and specialities. So those will also be taken note of, I'm sure, in the election management. As I call it, it's now going to be election mode in vaccination mode. So in the 5 elections, this is going to reflect. But the classic problems of maintaining neutrality, the classic problem of enforcing a healthy model code and maintaining security, these things will remain. I think the COVID-19 is an extra dose of responsibility which gets added to the already important bunch of responsibilities which the Commission has in conducting any election. But I'm sure Indian bureaucracy in the election time all rise as an election machinery and deliver the best election which the world looks at and tries to learn from.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Mr. Raut.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to a discussion on National Voters' Day, making our voters empowered, vigilant, safe and informed. The participants were Akshay Raut, former Director General of Election Commission of India, and Neelab Srivastav, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.